It was a quiet evening on the street where the narrator and his wife had just moved in. Their new house was modest but comfortable, with a small yard and a row of trees lining the driveway. The neighborhood seemed calm, the kind of place where people waved when they passed and life moved at a steady pace. The narrator had spent most of the day unpacking boxes and arranging the furniture, while his wife had been setting up her home office and organizing their kitchen. There was a sense of excitement in starting fresh, but also a quiet relief in leaving behind the chaos of their previous city life. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawns, the narrator decided to do some yard work. He grabbed the lawn trimmer and started tidying up the grass along the edges of the driveway. He enjoyed the simple satisfaction of seeing a messy yard transform into something neat and orderly. It was a small task, but one that gave him a sense of control and peace. The air was warm but not oppressive, and the faint sound of children playing in the distance made the neighborhood feel alive yet safe. He felt comfortable here, almost like he could finally breathe. Suddenly, a figure appeared near the entrance of the driveway. At first, the narrator thought it was a neighbor coming to introduce themselves, but as the person drew closer, he noticed something strange. The man was wearing a uniform that looked official at first glance, with a badge clipped to his chest. But the details were off. The fabric looked cheap, the stitching uneven, and the badge itself seemed like a poor copy of something real. The man's eyes were sharp, almost too sharp, scanning the narrator with an intensity that immediately made him uneasy. There was something about the way he carried himself, the rigid stance and the authoritative tone in his voice, that didn't match the calm, friendly vibe of the neighborhood. "Evening," the man said, his voice firm, almost too firm. "I'm with the HOA security and I need to know why you're violating neighborhood rules." The narrator paused mid-trim, unsure whether to laugh or to be cautious. He knew HOA rules could be strict about lawn care, paint colors, or fence heights, but he had done nothing to intentionally break any rules. The way the man spoke, though, left no room for discussion. He was demanding, commanding, as if the narrator had already committed some crime. "I'm sorry," the narrator replied carefully, trying to keep his tone calm. "Can you tell me what rule I'm violating?" The man's expression hardened. "You know what I'm talking about. You've been out here trimming your lawn at a suspicious hour, and your driveway isn't aligned with HOA standards. I need you to comply immediately." The narrator felt a knot in his stomach. Something wasn't right. The man's uniform didn't match anything he had seen the HOA distribute to residents, and his badge didn't have any official markings. There was no official ID, no paperwork, just a man asserting authority in a way that made the narrator uneasy. He tried to reason with him. "Look," he said, stepping back slightly, "I'm just doing yard work. I've only been here a few days. I haven't received any notices or warnings. Can we talk this through?" The man's eyes narrowed. "No talking. I need you to stop immediately and answer my questions." At that moment, the narrator realized the situation was escalating. The man's aggressive stance, the way he moved closer, and the tension in his voice made it clear that he was expecting compliance. The narrator could feel the adrenaline starting to rise, a mix of fear and instinct. He didn't want to make sudden moves, but he also knew he couldn't let this stranger dictate what he did on his own property. He subtly called out for his wife, keeping his voice low enough that the man wouldn't hear him clearly. "Honey," he whispered, glancing toward the house. "Come here for a second." Inside, his wife had been organizing some papers in her home office, reviewing her training logs from her past career. She had spent years in situations that demanded focus, precision, and quick thinking. Though it had been a while since she was active in the field, the skills never left her. Hearing the tension in her husband's voice, she immediately assessed the situation. She moved quietly toward the window that overlooked the driveway, careful not to alert the man outside. From her vantage point, she could see the man more clearly. He was gesturing aggressively, moving closer to the narrator, and something in his hand glinted in the fading light. It looked like a firearm. Her training kicked in instantly. She didn't panic. Instead, she scanned the scene for exits, cover, and ways to de-escalate the situation if possible. She noted the position of her husband, the man, and any neighbors who might be watching. Every detail mattered. Meanwhile, the narrator continued speaking, trying to keep the conversation calm but firm. "Sir, you can't just come onto my property and make demands like this. I need you to leave if you're not officially authorized." The man laughed, but it was more of a bark than a friendly laugh. I am authorized. You're breaking the rules and I have the right to enforce them. The narrator shook his head. Something about the man's words, the cheap uniform, and the way he moved didn't add up. He had dealt with authority before, and this didn't feel like any real enforcement he had seen. His instincts told him that this was not legitimate, that the man was trying to intimidate him. But the presence of a weapon meant he had to be careful. He couldn't confront the man directly without risking escalation. Inside the house, his wife quietly reached for a small emergency tool she kept within reach. It wasn't a weapon in the conventional sense, but it could be used to create distance or distraction if needed. She positioned herself so she could see the man without being seen, ready to move if the situation worsened. Her heart rate was steady, her mind focused on strategy rather than fear. She knew that most conflicts like this could be resolved without violence, but she was prepared for anything. Outside, the man was now visibly frustrated. You think you can ignore me? I'm in charge here. Stop hiding behind your walls. The narrator took another careful step back, maintaining a calm tone. I'm not hiding. I'm just asking you to identify yourself properly. You have no legal authority to threaten me like this. If you continue, I will call the police. The mention of calling the police seemed to make the man pause for a moment, but he quickly recovered. The authorities don't need to be involved. I am allowed to enforce rules in this neighborhood and you will comply. At that moment, the narrator realized that talking alone would not diffuse the tension. The man was trying to assert power, to intimidate them, and he wasn't backing down. He signaled subtly toward the house again, hoping his wife understood the urgency without alerting the man. She did. In the house, she took a deep breath and reminded herself to stay calm. She didn't need to act hastily. Her training had taught her patience and observation, and she knew that one wrong move could escalate things unnecessarily. She focused on reading the man's body language, noting the slight tremor in his hands, the tension in his shoulders, and the way his eyes darted toward the narrator and back toward the house. Every detail mattered, and she stored it in her mind to use if needed. The man, growing impatient, began to step closer, his movements aggressive and deliberate. The narrator felt a surge of anxiety but also a sense of clarity. He had faced tense situations before in life, and he knew that panicking would only make things worse. He spoke again slowly and firmly. Step back. You are on private property, and you have no right to threaten us. Leave now. The man's eyes narrowed, and he muttered something under his breath that the narrator couldn't hear. It was enough to confirm that he wasn't going to leave voluntarily. The narrator knew he had to buy time. He tried a different approach, appealing to reason. Listen, we are reasonable people. We want to live peacefully here. We're not trying to cause problems. Let's talk like neighbors, not adversaries. The man hesitated just slightly, and that moment of hesitation was enough for the narrator's wife to fully prepare. She adjusted her stance near the window, making sure she had a clear view of the man and any potential moves he might make. Her presence, though unseen, added an invisible layer of strength to the situation. Time seemed to stretch as the standoff continued. The man was aggressive but cautious, and the narrator remained calm, trying to project confidence even as his heart raced. The air was thick with tension, each second feeling like a test of nerves and judgment. The narrator knew that the way they handled this could determine whether it escalated into something dangerous or ended without harm. Finally, the narrator spoke one more time, his voice calm but firm. I'm asking you one last time. Leave this property. You are not authorized to threaten us, and if you do not leave, we will involve the real authorities. The man's gaze flicked toward the house, likely sensing that the narrator wasn't alone. He muttered something angrily and took a step back, but he didn't leave. The narrator and his wife both knew this wasn't over. The evening, which had begun so peacefully, had turned into a tense standoff that required patience, strategy, and calm thinking. But in that moment, both of them understood something important. Appearances could be deceiving, and the quiet street they had chosen as their new home could still hold unexpected challenges. And for the first time that evening, the narrator felt a quiet reassurance knowing that his wife, with her skills and calm judgment, was right there beside him, ready to protect. Inside the house, the narrator's wife stayed close to the window, her eyes never leaving the man outside. Her mind was sharp and focused. Years of training had taught her to notice details that others might miss, like small movements, tension in posture, or the weight someone carried. She could see the man's hand twitching near what looked like a firearm, the way he shifted his weight from foot to foot, and the subtle flickers of anger in his expression. Every little sign told her that this wasn't just a bluff. This man was dangerous, and he could escalate quickly if provoked. She knew she had to remain calm. Panic could make the situation worse. Her husband outside looked tense but was holding his ground, trying to reason with the man. She admired his courage, but she also knew that courage alone wasn't enough. It was time to think strategically. She scanned the yard and driveway, noting possible positions of cover, the angles of the street, and whether any neighbors might have noticed the confrontation. The evening light was fading, and shadows stretched across the lawns, which could give her both an advantage and a challenge. The narrator, feeling the tension grow, decided to take small steps to maintain distance while keeping his tone calm. "Sir, I really don't want trouble. You need to leave this property. There is no reason for this to get out of hand," he said. His voice was steady, but his heart was racing. He could feel the adrenaline surge, heightening his senses, making him notice every detail of the man's movements. The way the man's eyes darted between the narrator and the house, the tightening of his jaw, and the subtle grip on the object in his hand. All of it was critical information. The man snorted and took another step forward. "I'm not leaving until I see proof that you're following all rules. You think you can tell me to leave?" "I have authority here," he said, his voice sharper now. It wasn't just arrogance. It was a threat. The narrator realized that this man was trying to intimidate him, to make him act rashly. But rushing or showing fear could make the situation worse. He took another step back, giving the man more room but keeping his posture calm and assertive. Inside, the narrator's wife made a decision. She needed to be ready to act if things escalated, but she also knew that appearing overly aggressive could provoke the man. She adjusted her stance near the window, ensuring she had a clear line of sight without revealing herself completely. Her training allowed her to stay invisible while gathering critical information. She noticed the man's uneven stance, the way he was holding the object, and the slight hesitation in his movements. Those small signs told her that while he was dangerous, he was also nervous and unsure. She quietly reached for a small emergency tool she kept nearby. It wasn't a weapon in the conventional sense, but it could be used to create distance or distraction if needed. She thought through multiple scenarios. What if he advanced aggressively? What if he tried to grab her husband? What if he made a sudden move with the object in his hand? Each possibility was analyzed quickly, and she had a plan for each one. Her training made her think ahead, not just react. The narrator, sensing the growing tension, decided to try reasoning one more time. "Listen, we want to be good neighbors. We're new here and trying to follow all rules. There's no need for threats or confrontation. Please leave before this becomes more serious." His words were calm, measured, and deliberate. He hoped the man would recognize reason, but he also prepared himself mentally for the possibility that reason might not work. The man's eyes narrowed, and he let out a harsh laugh. "Reason? You think reason works when rules are being broken? You have to understand I can enforce what I need to. You can't tell me what to do," he said, stepping closer. The narrator's heart pounded, but he stayed still, keeping his movements slow and deliberate to avoid sudden reactions. The narrator's wife assessed the situation silently. She could see that the man's focus was split. He was watching her husband closely while also scanning the driveway and the street. His attention wasn't complete. He was overconfident and underestimating them both. That overconfidence could be used to their advantage. She thought about how to de-escalate while also preparing for the possibility that she might need to intervene. As the standoff continued, the man started muttering to himself, agitated and impatient. His hand hovered near the object in his belt. The narrator noticed this and felt a surge of protective instinct. He couldn't let his wife or himself be harmed. But he also knew that acting recklessly could trigger violence. He focused on breathing slowly, keeping his voice calm and maintaining a posture that was neither aggressive nor submissive. The narrator's wife saw an opening. She noticed that the man's weight was slightly forward, his grip on the object unsteady. That moment of imbalance could be crucial if she needed to act. She also realized that the longer this confrontation went on, the more likely the man would make a mistake. She needed to be patient but ready. Her hand rested lightly on the tool she had prepared, ready to move in a controlled and precise manner. The narrator, sensing a slight shift in the man's stance, decided to take another careful step backward, moving toward the house while keeping eye contact. Please, just step back and leave. You don't need to do this, he said. His tone was calm but firm. He hoped to appeal to any remaining sense of reason the man might have, buying time and keeping himself and his wife safe. The man sneered but hesitated slightly. That hesitation was enough for the narrator's wife to plan her next move. She quietly moved toward a better position near the window, ensuring she could see all angles of the driveway and street. Her mind was analyzing every possible reaction the man could have. She considered what she could do to create distance between him and her husband, how to use her presence as a deterrent, and how to protect them both without escalating the situation. Suddenly, the man raised his voice. "I'm warning you. I have authority here, and you will listen to me." His hand moved slightly, and the glint of the object became clearer in the fading light. The narrator's pulse quickened, but he stayed calm, realizing that panic could make things worse. He took another careful step back, moving closer to the safety of the porch. Inside, his wife remained focused. She could feel the tension, the way the man's posture had shifted, and she knew he was testing them. Her training allowed her to remain invisible in plain sight, analyzing, planning, and waiting for the right moment. She knew that most conflicts like this could be resolved without violence. But she also knew that preparedness was critical. Every second mattered. The man, frustrated and growing bolder, took another step forward. His voice was louder now, and he seemed less in control of his own emotions. The narrator realized that the man's overconfidence and aggression were his weaknesses. He stayed still, using calm words and slow movements to avoid provoking a sudden reaction. The narrator's wife, seeing the escalation, knew it was time to prepare for immediate action. She quietly checked the position of the man, the narrator, and any neighbors who might be watching. She adjusted her grip on the tool and readied herself to move with precision if necessary. Her training had taught her to stay calm under pressure, to act only when needed, and to control the situation without causing harm. The man's gaze flicked toward the house, and he muttered something angrily. It was clear he was aware that the narrator wasn't alone. That awareness made him cautious, but it also made him unpredictable. The narrator's wife stayed perfectly still, blending into the background, a silent presence that could shift the balance of the confrontation. The narrator, feeling the tension reach a peak, spoke once more. "I'm asking you to leave now. This is our property. You have no authority here. Please step back and go." His voice was calm but carried an edge of firmness that made it clear he wasn't bluffing. The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment it seemed like he might make a sudden move. The narrator's wife tightened her grip on the tool, ready to act in a split second if necessary. The air was thick with anticipation. The street was quiet except for the low hum of distant traffic and the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. And then, the man paused. The tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Both the narrator and his wife knew that what happened next could change everything. They were prepared, focused, and calm. They had each other, and that made all the difference. The night was far from over, and the confrontation was far from resolved. But in that moment, both of them realized something important. They had the skills, the patience, and the awareness to face this challenge together, and that realization gave them a quiet strength, the kind that comes from knowing you can rely on each other no matter what happens next. The evening air had grown cooler, and shadows stretched across the driveway as the sun sank behind the houses. The narrator's heart was pounding, yet he kept his movements slow and deliberate. Every instinct told him to remain calm, to breathe steadily, and to think through each action carefully. Outside, the man in the fake uniform shifted his weight, his hand inching closer to what now clearly appeared to be a firearm. The narrator could feel the danger escalating. He knew that one wrong move could trigger a violent reaction, and that thought made his body tense. Inside, his wife remained near the window, invisible but fully aware of every detail. She could see the man's face clearly now. His eyes darted between the narrator and the house, scanning for any sign of vulnerability. He was angry, overconfident, and dangerously unpredictable. She noted the subtle way his shoulders tightened, the slight quiver in his hand, and the uneven grip on the object he held. These small details told her everything she needed to know. He was dangerous, but he wasn't entirely in control. The narrator spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "You don't have the right to threaten us. Step back and leave. This is private property. We are not breaking any laws." He kept his tone steady, avoiding the sharpness that could provoke the man. The narrator knew that talking alone might not work, but he also knew that losing his composure could make the situation worse. He kept one eye on the man's movements, ready to move slowly toward the house if necessary. The man's response was a sneer and a step forward. "You think I'm bluffing? I'm authorized to enforce the rules here. You will comply or you'll face consequences," he said. His voice was loud now, almost shouting, and his hand moved in a way that made the glint of the object unmistakable. The narrator realized that this was no longer just a test of nerves. This was a direct threat. Inside, his wife acted on instinct. She moved slightly, shifting her position so she could see both the narrator and the man more clearly. Her breathing was controlled, her body steady. Years of training had taught her how to stay calm under extreme pressure, and that training was guiding her every decision. She had already prepared a tool to create distance or distraction if necessary, but she knew timing was crucial. Acting too soon could provoke the man. Waiting too long could give him the opportunity to make a dangerous move. The narrator continued speaking, hoping to maintain control of the situation. "Please, you don't need to do this. Leave now and we can avoid any trouble. You don't want to escalate this," he said. His voice carried authority, not just fear. He hoped that reason, combined with calm confidence, might make the man hesitate. The man's eyes flicked toward the house, and for a brief moment he paused. That pause was a critical opening. The narrator's wife recognized it instantly. She could see the man's overconfidence wavering, his focus splitting between the narrator and the possibility that someone else was inside the house. That distraction could be used to de-escalate or to gain control if necessary. Then, without warning, the man stepped closer, raising the object in his hand. The narrator's pulse spiked. He instinctively moved backward toward the porch, his eyes never leaving the man. The tension was electric, the kind that makes every second stretch painfully long. He could see the man's face twisted with anger, ready to take action but still uncertain because of the unseen presence inside the house. Inside, his wife made her decision. She wasn't going to wait until a mistake happened. She moved with precision, keeping her body low and her movements controlled. Her training taught her to neutralize threats without unnecessary risk. She didn't need to shout or reveal herself yet. All she needed was to create an advantage. She positioned herself where she could act quickly if the man advanced, ready to protect both herself and her husband. The man outside shifted again, clearly agitated. "I said you will comply. Stop hiding behind your walls." His voice carried through the yard, sharp and aggressive. The narrator knew that words alone were no longer enough. The man was testing them, trying to force a reaction. The narrator's heart pounded, but he stayed steady, moving carefully toward the house while keeping eye contact. The wife observed everything, noting the man's foot placement, the angle of his body, and the way he held the object. Her mind calculated possibilities, weighing the risk of each action. She knew that if the man raised the weapon fully, she might have to act instantly to prevent harm. But she also knew that a controlled, precise intervention could resolve the situation without violence. Her calmness contrasted with the chaos outside, giving her an advantage. Suddenly, the man lunged slightly as if to intimidate the narrator. His hand raised more clearly, and the glint of the firearm caught the fading sunlight. The narrator froze for a brief moment, realizing how quickly things could go wrong. He remembered all the safety advice he had heard over the years. Never turn your back, keep your movement slow, and always maintain awareness of exits and cover. He took a slow, measured step back toward the porch, hoping to buy more time. Inside, his wife acted with precision. She grabbed the emergency tool, holding it ready. Her plan was simple but effective. If the man made a sudden move, she could create a moment of distraction, allowing them both to gain distance and control. She didn't need to use it aggressively. Even the slight sound of movement could make the man hesitate. She stayed completely calm, her mind focused on the actions that mattered most. The man, frustrated and angry, began shouting more loudly, trying to provoke a reaction. "Stop hiding! You think you can ignore me? Step out and face the consequences." His voice was harsh and his movements more erratic. The narrator remained calm, speaking slowly. "We're not hiding. We're asking you to leave. You have no authority here. Please step back." That pause, that small moment of clarity, was enough for the wife to make a subtle move. She shifted her weight, positioning herself so that if the man advanced, she could act quickly to protect her husband. Every movement was deliberate. She didn't speak, she didn't shout. She simply prepared, staying invisible but ready. The man's attention flicked again toward the house, and he muttered angrily under his breath. He was becoming aware that there was more here than he realized. That awareness made him cautious, but it also made him unpredictable. The narrator could sense it too. He knew the man was dangerous, but he also knew that the man's overconfidence was his weakness. Time seemed to stretch as the standoff continued. The narrator kept his movements slow, his voice calm, and his posture steady. The man was testing them, trying to provoke fear or panic. The narrator stayed grounded, relying on his wife's unseen presence and the careful planning she had taught him to respect. Then, without warning, the man took a step closer and raised the firearm more clearly. The narrator froze, his mind racing. He could see the seriousness in the man's eyes, the anger and frustration mingling with a hint of uncertainty. This was the moment that could change everything. He hoped that his calm presence, combined with the unseen support inside the house, would give them a chance to handle the situation safely. The wife, seeing the man raise the weapon, made her move. She acted with perfect timing, moving into a position that allowed her to create distance and control without escalating violence. Her presence, though still unseen, was now a silent force that could influence the outcome. She knew exactly what she would do if the man advanced further. Her training allowed her to stay calm, precise, and effective under pressure. The man hesitated. That hesitation, just a fraction of a second, was critical. It gave the narrator a chance to take another slow step back toward the porch, gaining more distance between himself and the potential threat. The tension in the air was almost unbearable, each second stretching as they waited for the next move. The narrator spoke again, his voice steady and firm. "Please leave now. You are not authorized here. Step back and leave this property before someone gets hurt." His words were calm, yet they carried authority. He hoped that the combination of his composure and his wife's unseen presence would finally convince the man to stop. For a moment the man froze, clearly unsure of how to proceed. The narrator's wife stayed perfectly still, ready to act if needed. The balance of the confrontation had shifted. The man's overconfidence had met with calm, precise preparation, and it was creating doubt in his mind. The street was quiet except for the low hum of distant traffic and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. The tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Both the narrator and his wife understood that the next few moments could determine the outcome. They were prepared, focused, and calm. They had each other, and that gave them strength. As the man continued to hesitate, the narrator realized something important. Courage alone wasn't enough in a situation like this. It was patience, preparation, and awareness that would protect them. And with his wife's skills supporting him, he felt a quiet reassurance. They were ready for whatever came next. The confrontation was far from over, but the groundwork had been laid. Both the narrator and his wife were calm, alert, and ready. The man outside, for the first time that evening, seemed unsure. He had underestimated them, and that hesitation could be the difference between danger and safety. The evening stretched on, the tension thick, but the narrator and his wife remained steady. They had faced the first test. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. The man outside had frozen, clearly aware now that this situation was not going to unfold in his favor. His aggressive stance wavered, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. The narrator's wife, positioned strategically inside the house, saw it immediately. She could feel the weight of the moment. Every second counted, and the slightest misstep could turn a tense standoff into something much more dangerous. She had already assessed the layout of the driveway, the distance between her husband and the man, and the potential exits. Her training had taught her to visualize scenarios in advance, to anticipate movements, and to control a situation without escalating violence unless absolutely necessary. She took a deep breath, calming herself further, focusing her attention on the man outside. His hand hovered near what she now saw was a realistic-looking firearm. The glint of metal in the fading light was enough to confirm that this threat could not be ignored. The narrator, sensing the shift in the man's demeanor, remained calm but alert. He stayed close to the porch, his hands visible, making no sudden movements. He knew that panic could provoke the man into doing something dangerous. He spoke slowly, deliberately, keeping his tone firm but not aggressive. "Step back and leave now. This is private property. You have no authority here. We do not want anyone hurt." The man's eyes flicked toward the house, and for the first time his confidence faltered. He muttered something under his breath, frustrated, perhaps realizing that the situation had shifted. He had underestimated the couple. That small crack in his composure was enough for the narrator's wife to act. She knew she had to move decisively but quietly, maintaining control while minimizing risk. She shifted slightly, adjusting her position behind the window, staying out of sight but gaining a clear line of sight to the man. Her body was low, her movements deliberate. She held the emergency tool she had prepared, ready to create distance or distraction if necessary. She didn't need to act aggressively yet. Her presence alone, precise and confident, was already altering the man's perception of the situation. The man, growing increasingly agitated, raised the firearm slightly. "I said step out and comply." "Stop hiding! You think you can ignore me?" His voice was harsh, but now there was a tremor of uncertainty in it. He was losing control, and the narrator could sense it. Every instinct told him to remain calm and not provoke him further. He stayed still, keeping his eyes on the man, his body language composed but assertive. Inside, the narrator's wife calculated her next move. She knew that if the man advanced, she would have to act quickly to protect her husband. Her mind ran through the steps she would take, creating distance using the element of surprise and neutralizing the immediate threat without causing unnecessary harm. She had done this before in training exercises, but now the stakes were real. Her calmness, honed over years of preparation, was her greatest asset. Suddenly, the man took a step forward, his hand tightening around the firearm. The narrator instinctively moved slightly backward toward the porch steps, careful to keep his movements slow and visible. The tension spiked. The man's overconfidence was meeting the couple's calculated readiness, and the balance of power was shifting. The narrator's wife acted without hesitation. She moved into a position where she could influence the situation safely, her body low, tool ready. With precise timing, she made a subtle noise, enough to catch the man's attention and create a moment of distraction. He turned slightly, his focus divided. That moment, small as it was, gave her the chance to take control. With years of tactical experience guiding her, she stepped forward just enough to assert presence without escalating aggression. Her voice, calm but commanding, cut through the tension. "Put it down now," she said. The clarity in her tone, the authority that came from her experience, startled the man. His eyes widened slightly, realizing that he was facing someone trained and capable. The man hesitated, uncertainty now fully evident on his face. He had expected fear, hesitation, and panic. Instead, he was met with calm precision. The narrator's wife moved subtly, positioning herself so she could create a barrier between him and her husband. She was ready to act if necessary, but she did not need to make the first move aggressively. Her posture alone communicated control and readiness. The man, frustrated and panicked, raised the firearm slightly higher. "I'm telling you, comply," he shouted. His voice cracked under the pressure. The narrator stayed still, his hands visible, his voice calm but firm. "Step back, leave, you have no authority. This is private property." The wife's eyes never left him. She could see the tension in his muscles, the way he was shifting weight, the grip on the weapon. She calculated her timing. With one deliberate step forward, she shifted the man's attention again, subtly directing him away from her husband. Her presence, precise and controlled, was enough to make him second-guess his actions. The narrator took advantage of the distraction, moving slightly to a safer position closer to the porch. He kept speaking, calm but firm. "You are not authorized here. Leave now before this situation becomes worse. Step back and leave." His voice had a quiet authority, a confidence that came not from bravado but from trust in his wife's capabilities and his own calm decision-making. The man's hand wavered. His aggression was still there, but doubt had crept in. He muttered angrily, unsure whether to advance or retreat. That moment of hesitation was critical. The narrator's wife saw the opening and prepared for the next step. She didn't need to strike. Her goal was to neutralize the immediate threat and create space to gain full control. With a precise, fluid motion, she stepped slightly forward, her body positioned to block any sudden move. The man's attention split again, uncertainty now fully visible in his expression. The narrator remained steady, ready to call for help but trusting that his wife could manage the immediate threat. He could feel the adrenaline in his veins, but his training in observation and patience kept him grounded. The man, realizing he was outmatched in terms of composure and strategy, began to backpedal slightly, unsure of his next move. The wife stayed poised, ready for any sudden action. Her presence alone, calm and commanding, was creating control over a situation that had seemed chaotic moments before. The narrator spoke again, his voice steady and controlled. "Step back. Leave this property now. You are not authorized here. If you continue, the authorities will be involved." His words were deliberate, measured, and firm. He knew that keeping his composure was essential. Panic or sudden movements could trigger a dangerous response. The man hesitated. His gaze flicked between the narrator and the house, and then he muttered angrily, weighing his options. He seemed to realize that he had underestimated his opponents. The wife observed every micro-expression, every subtle movement. She calculated that if he advanced even slightly, she could intervene to neutralize the immediate threat safely. Finally, the man's frustration overcame his aggression. He took a step backward, lowering the firearm slightly. His breathing was heavier now, his face tense with anger and confusion. The narrator kept his distance, maintaining calm and steady posture. "Leave now," he said quietly but firmly. "This is your last warning." The wife, still positioned strategically inside the house, prepared to continue monitoring him until he fully retreated. Her eyes scanned the yard, the driveway, and the street beyond, ensuring that there were no sudden surprises. She could see that the man was now reconsidering his actions, realizing that he was not in control. Minutes felt like hours as the man continued to hesitate. The narrator stayed composed, his movements deliberate, maintaining eye contact but not provoking further aggression. The wife remained ready, her body alert and prepared, projecting control and calm. The balance had shifted entirely. The man's overconfidence had met with precise preparation, and he was now uncertain and cautious. Finally, the man took a few steps backward, lowering his hands. He muttered under his breath, clearly realizing that he had no advantage. The narrator kept his distance but remained alert, ready to respond if necessary. His wife's presence, strategic positioning, and calm authority had shifted the dynamics of the confrontation completely. The tension slowly began to ease. The man, frustrated and clearly outmatched, finally turned and walked toward the street, muttering angrily but without further threat. The narrator and his wife stayed vigilant, watching him retreat until he was safely out of sight. The adrenaline in their bodies slowly began to ebb, replaced by a cautious relief. Inside, the wife finally exhaled, releasing the tension she had been holding. She walked to her husband, who was still on the porch, eyes scanning the street to ensure the man had truly left. They exchanged a quiet glance, a mix of relief and unspoken recognition of how dangerous the situation had been. The narrator's mind raced with what had just happened. He realized that without his wife's calm judgment, precise timing, and tactical training, the encounter could have ended very differently. Her skills had transformed a potentially deadly situation into a controlled outcome. They were safe, but the lesson was clear. Danger could appear anywhere, and calm preparation, awareness, and teamwork could make all the difference. As the night settled over the street, the couple remained vigilant, reinforcing their awareness